lot of things that inspired me to pursue music. Definitely one being my father, and my family, my parents were divorced as I was growing up, and so I was grateful to have a very important stepfather in my life too, who also showed me a lot of music. But my father, when I would visit him, we tended to do like a listening session, he had me on like a historical track as I visited him. So he was always showing me something new every time I came to see him, and I was often very resistant to it because I tend to be resistant to new things. As much as I have moved all over the country in my life, because I've also done that, as you'd think I'd be adapted well to change by now, but sometimes things, I can be resistant to. So my dad would always play something for me, and then I'd always I don't like that. And then about a week later, I go, hey Dad, what was that song we were listening to last week? And he's like, oh, you want to hear it now? I'm like, no, I just want to know. He's like, you want to hear it? And I was like, okay, yeah, I want to hear it. And he'd always get these earworms, basically. He'd give me them every time I went to his place, and so there's that, from my father's side, and but really my inspiration to play jazz came when I was about 13. When I was one of the kids in a program where in certain parts of the country where they let you pick an instrument at a certain grade. I guess they do it everywhere now, but it felt like they didn't do it everywhere when I was a lot younger, and I had to pick 3 instruments, and then around that time I had been introduced to Bruce Springsteen and Clarence Clemens. His saxophonist was his sound and his playing and his music it inspired me to play the saxophone. And so I had this saxophone for a few years that I played in concert band, but I was not very dedicated to it, I would say. It wasn't until I moved to Kansas City, going into 7th grade, where I joined the jazz band. And I had this, I had an opportunity to solo, basically, but the way I got the solo is a little funny, and it's partly how I became a jazz musician, or it's a big part, I should say. In school band, a lot of times, at least in my generation, kids didn't like soloing, and so it was almost considered like a punishment if you got a solo. Because you have to stand in front of all the parents with their camcorders, wanting to videotape you. So it's all being documented across the whole neighborhood, basically. And I was a very obnoxious, well, I still am, a very obnoxious student. And I tended to try to get all the attention, and didn't matter if it was good or bad, as long as it was attention. And so I was, being very immature in band, doing dumb stuff, talking, purposefully interrupting my teacher, stuff like that. And one day my teacher had enough, and he said, Morgan, you get to solo. And all the kids were like, ooh, because they were all tired of my obnoxious behavior as well. So they were like, oh, this will shut him down. And I decided in that moment that I wanted to prove everybody wrong, because they were all like, oh, Morgan, you're going to suck. You're not going to, this is going to be great. Morgan's got a solo. And I said to myself, I'm not going to let them make fun of me. I'm going to prove them all wrong. And so I went home and practiced for the longest I had ever practiced in my life, an hour. and I prepared this solo over the blues scale. And and I was, after that hour, I was like, oh, I am so ready. I'll never have to practice again, probably. That's all I had to do. I've mastered or whatever, I was so just ready and felt very confident. And I went into that rehearsal, and it was time to do the solo in the rehearsal, and I played it, and the whole band got quiet. It was like, and it was, and going back now, you listen to it, it sounds, it sounds kind of, it sounds like a seventh grader playing the saxophone. You know, it's not very good, but it was so much more than what, you know, I guess the expectations were of my peers and my band director. And so like they were like, Morgan, like that sounded great. Like what was that? And so the time came to do the concert, and I performed, and I didn't get nervous. I noticed I had no stage fright, and I realized that I really enjoyed soloing. I enjoyed the spotlight. I enjoyed the attention. I enjoyed everybody's camera being, you know, it was like I discovered I have something I'm good at now, because at that point, you know, I didn't really know who I was or what I was going to be. I just liked being a kid, and so after that day, I always rose my hand I volunteered for every song and tried to get a solo on every song we played. And I usually got at least one or two. And I did that through middle school, and when I got into high school, I had gotten into like the top jazz band there, like the varsity band, I guess you could call it. And my mom kind of helped me find some teachers that would teach me the saxophone better and all this. And I quickly discovered that I was not prepared to study with the great Dan Thomas, who's a great educator in Kansas City and a dear friend, and still a teacher of mine today. But me learning from him was cut short, because I really wasn't necessarily ready, and you know, so I kind of found myself searching for a while again, trying to figure that out. And it wasn't until I met Chris Burnett, who's like my grandfather now, you know, like my mentor in music and life and everything, all the above. He took a lot of interest in me when I took a lot of interest in wanting to study with him. And during this year that I was trying to, because I wanted to play music, but I just was really struggling with trying to understand it. And I couldn't seem to find a teacher that could get through to me. There was a great teacher I was with that had all these incredible, analogies, you know, had all these great books. And even that couldn't get through to me. And it wasn't until I met Chris, where he taught in a certain way, and he was able to just open up my brain and start feeding it information. And as we started studying more and more, as I began to grow, he started taking me down to 18 the Vine, because the way I met him was through a jazz workshop, basically. My mom had found like a program for high schoolers to go and study jazz during the weekend at a community college in downtown Kansas City. And that's where Chris was teaching. And so that's how I met him. And so I would go to this community college to have, you know, be in classes, and then I would have a lesson with Chris, and Chris started taking me down to 18th and Vine. We started doing this routine where we'd go to this place called Lufty's on 31st and Main Street, and it's a fried catfish spot. And we'd buy a pound of catfish, we'd split between us, and then he'd have me buy a piece of orange cake that we'd take to Miss White, who used to run the gift shop in the American Jazz Museum, which is where we were going to. And Chris immediately started introducing me to everybody in the community, everybody inside the museum, the security guards, who are some of my closest friends now still, who I just saw recently, all of the directors, the people that work the marketing, and like everybody. I was introduced to everybody in like a day. And I just started showing up more and more, and being on 18th and Vine, I started learning about the historical significance of it. And a few months later, I started wanting to be a part of, work at the museum. I wanted to find a way to engage more, and it basically, to cut this very long answer short, it was basically me being introduced to this community, starting to understand the historical significance of it, but also as I had traveled around the world, the country, moving to place, because my mother was an executive in the agriculture business for many years, and so she went to different jobs for more money. And I never found a way to ground myself. I never found a time to put my roots down because every couple of years we were moving. So Kansas City was the longest place I lived in my adolescence, and it was where I was able to put my roots down. And I became all of a sudden found myself being adopted by all these different, aunties and, uncles and nanas and grandmothers and grandfathers and elder statesmen. They just all started pouring into me because I guess they saw something in me that I didn't at the time. I just all of a sudden felt like I had this family out of nowhere. And I was no longer feeling like I was this wandering, kid trying to figure out who he was. I was starting to be they had planted a seed, essentially. I was the seed that they had planted. And I just started to grow. And it just became this love, this need. I needed to practice, I needed to go out and play. I needed to go to jam sessions. I needed to start. I wanted nothing more than this. And it came from love of a whole community, a whole village of people, and times I was like, I'm just this white boy from, kind of from out of town that's trying to put his roots down now and grow up, and I was just adopted into this wonderful family, this culture, and of course, being the best saxophonist and being, the student of soon after I started working at the Jazz Museum, I started studying with the great Bobby Watson, who has become an equally critical mentor in my life as all the ones I've just mentioned already. And I, of course, wanted to practice for him and become better and get his approval, but I also just loved this music, and it just blossomed for me in a way that I'm really grateful for, because I feel like I don't feel like I've not seen a lot of musicians my age, at least in Kansas City, have opportunities to be around, these great musicians, and then to get an opportunity to go abroad, go elsewhere, and continue pursuing it. And I'm very, very grateful to be able to be in that position, and I'm hoping that I'm very hopeful because of what's happening now in Kansas City with a lot more youth programs, that more kids can start getting out more and evolve and come back and engage, and it's because I discovered Kansas City is where my roots are, and I'm out here trying to grow some leaves to come back and plant new seeds, so very long answer, but it's that's what inspired me. There's so many factors that I could talk for an hour straight on just that question.